Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. I'm going to try to take you to Omaha Beach, which I consider a sacred ground, sacred place. This is not just a travel talk. I want to give you a sense of really being there and what it all means. I recently came across a quote which I have really adopted. There is a voice that doesn't use words. Listen. And when you visit a place such as Omaha Beach, I consider that knowing history activates your hearing aid so that you can listen to the words that are not spoken. It's one of the best pictures I've seen of what D-Day looked like once the landings were successful. It was a massive, massive operation. To give you a sense of the time and the place, we're talking about June 6, 1944, 4 years after France surrendered. And France surrendered very quickly after Paris fell. But once the Allies got back into France on D-Day, by the way, D-Day doesn't particularly mean anything. It was just what they were adopting. France was conquered fairly quickly, reconquered, I guess I should say. So the invasions, World War II, occurred in the Normandy area of France. Again, a massive operation. It's 175,000 Allies. They outnumbered the Germans that were in the area. And although we typically talk about the armed forces, a lot of civilians were killed during the overall invasions of France. There were 5 beaches, 2 organized and led by Americans, 2 British, and 1 Canadian. I can't tell you about the other 4 beaches because I spent a couple of days at Omaha and didn't go to the other ones. Got there by taking a train from Paris, rapid train into Cannes, and rented a car, spent a couple of days there in the Bayou Tapestry, associated with 1066 and the invasion of England. That was interesting. The main reason, of course, going there was to visit Omaha Beach, to do witness. On the D-Day invasion objective, look at the dotted line. And can you see my cursor here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the D-Day invasion objective was to get 4 to 9 miles inland and to link most of the forces landing at these different beaches. They did not achieve the objectives. Omaha Beach, they barely got on the beach successfully. If you've never seen the movie The Longest Day, I highly recommend it. It puts all of this in perspective. It's one of the photographs of what it looked like coming onto the beach. So let's talk now about what it's like to visit there today. This is what the beach looked like when I visited in 2009. It's a peaceful place. I guess during the summer, there's probably a bunch of people out on the beach having fun. This was September. It was a slightly windy day. It's worth having a jacket on. It's a very peaceful place. There's not that much left on the beach that tells you what's special. There's a few things, and I'll show you a couple of pictures. And this is what the Germans saw prior to a whole, almost 7,000 ships coming at them. Again, a peaceful place, except a few memorials. This is one of the ones was for the Engineer Special Brigade that helped get through some of the things the Germans had put in the way. There were tank traps and all kinds of things, all of which have been removed today. Looking down the beach, you see this point. This is not Point du Hoc, but it's the one next to it, and it looks the same. So a very peaceful place. You can see on this September day, there's almost no one at the beach, but yet you hear voices. And if you know your history, you know that on June 6th, this beach that you can walk along as far as you want, it was a completely different place. One part of the beach that was quite a bit different is Point du Hoc. So if you can see the cursor, this point way off in the distance is the one that you saw in my previous photograph, where, so it's one cove, if you will, removed from Point du Hoc. Point du Hoc, unlike the beach, other than vegetation and the weather, they have left it untouched. That well, they put in these walkways. So it's pockmarked. It's because of the Allied shelling of the area. And you can walk around, crawl around. You see various places where there had been guns in place, but they were actually removed before D-Day. But look at how thick the concrete was. You go up there and you mess with it, you look at it. The Germans had built these things, and all along the coast, they really built them sturdy. This was not an El Cheapo sort of operation. And it's quite eerie walking along the edge of the point, looking down on the right side here, and knowing that hundreds of American soldiers, Rangers, tried crawling up this cliff. The original barbed wire is still here. And imagine coming up that cliff, or if you're on a German side, seeing determined Americans coming up that cliff at you. It's a remarkable sensation. A few kilometers away is the town of Sainte-Mère-Église, where an airborne division got blown off course, and they came down into the town square, and most of them were killed on the way down. Instead of coming down where they wanted to, outside town, here they were quite visible. And a particularly famous individual, John Steele, came down, his parachute caught on the church, and they have a dummy up there because it's a fairly famous place. Again, imagine you coming down, you're seeing your friends, your buddies slaughtered by Germans shooting up at the parachute. Chute is coming down. Well, you don't get completely killed. Well, that's kind of a strange comment, isn't it? But you get hit in your foot, and your parachute gets caught, and you're hanging on the side of the church for 2 hours, playing dead. Eventually, the Germans caught him. He later, I don't know, remember whether it was weeks or months later, he eventually escaped and lived. That had to be an almost undescribable experience. Now, I would say the centerpiece of visiting Omaha Beach was to go to one of the cemeteries. It's the largest. It's the Normandy American Cemetery. 9,400 of our fellow Americans are buried there. As you come in, you can look up if you have a name of a friend, a relative, an ancestor who is buried there. They've got plaques where you can look up the names and get the exact location of the grave. And that's indeed what it looked like most of the people that I saw were doing. You saw people finding individual graves among the row and the row and the row of crosses and a few stars of David. It's quite an experience. You come across a few crosses that read this way: "Here lies in honored glory a comrade in arms, known but to God." So on that day, what I heard was, remember us. And freedom isn't free. And when you walk through a place like this, it's unavoidable. If you ever had a chance to visit any of these places, and there is a talk among some people at Jack C. High, Lisa Demers proposed getting on a tour, probably in August. And the first place that this series of locations, first place on the list is Omaha Beach, and that's what motivated this talk. So if you ever have a chance to go to any of these places, activate your hearing aid, do your homework. For Omaha Beach, I highly recommend the movies Longest Day and Saving Private Ryan. Saving Private Ryan, and I'll put these two links. I guess a show of hands, how many people have seen this movie Saving Private Ryan? Okay, maybe a majority. It opens in the cemetery that I just showed you. And a elderly man, followed by his family, is walking into the cemetery. And you don't yet know who he is. And you can watch that scene on YouTube anytime you want. It's very powerful. The end of the movie picks up where the first scene starts, left you. In between basically the whole movie, you're back at the invasion in 1944. And then the closing scene is even more powerful. A survivor of the invasion goes up to a grave, and I won't spoil exactly what happens. And he talks to a person who had saved him, basically sacrificing himself for the man who lived a long life, had a family. And he asked the question, I hope that in your eyes, I've earned what all of you have done for me. And indeed, all of us who have the privilege of living in this country and the freedom that we have, I pose to you the challenge that we ask ourselves in thinking about those who sacrificed themselves in World War II and other conflicts, have we earned what they did for us? That's my challenge, and I pass it to you. So activate your hearing aid, know your history, and if you ever have a chance to visit a place like Normandy or Dachau or any of these other sacred locations, I encourage you to do it. Mr. Toastmaster.